recording. Alright, so usually I start off with a gray background because it's much easier to kind of you won't get too bright, too dark, right? And I'll work tones from middle outwards, from middle tone to bright to middle tone to dark, right? Because it's easier. And I put usually a 3D arrow to kind of indicate which direction the light's coming from. So I've set it from a top right in the front to kind of put that in. I'm laying out really quick shadows. I don't try to be too clean. I'm going really messy. I'll clean it up later, right? I'll later post this up so that it's a little bit easier. So I'll do another tone. So I'll do another layer. I could do it with all in one brush, but I find that doing it in multiple layers, I can just kind of, adjust if I've gone too dark in the opacity by using a different layer. And again, I'll probably either do another tone. Sometimes I'll do 3 passes of dark. I'll eventually merge this down. Now, one of the blocks that I had when I was first learning to paint, even digital painting or traditional painting, is the line work. How do you get rid of lines, right? And I treat a lot of my tones painting like I kind of do with drawing. I'll eventually take those lines and I'll smudge it into a tone. So right now there's like 3 tones. I'll do light and then I'll merge the layers and smudge it in, right? So now I've done a layer with, I don't like to play around with different tones of gray. I just go straight white, straight black, and just on the different layers play with the opacity. It allows me to do it, block it out much quicker than if I was to have a brush and just do it by pressure alone, right? I'll just do it really quick because I don't want to spend too much time blocking this out. It takes, so it's starting to come, and I'm not worried about being too clean. And again, another layer, gone a little bit thicker with the white, right? And I'll work out those details. It makes it a little bit easier to see. And base off all the direction of my light really quickly. Sometimes I do a clean line work, or sometimes I work really rough. It depends on how polished I want to get, but this line work was, it's okay. Not terribly polished. But I emphasize certain things, how much I want. Now I put a gradient over the whole image to just kind of separate my contrast, because the lips before were about the same brightness as the top of the head. I've just used opacity just to knock it back, right? So I still have those lights and have that depth, and I've kind of cleaned it up. Now I kind of didn't show this in my layers because it's the way I've recorded it, but I put a masking, I put a group on there, and I've basically isolated, copied my layers 3 times, one dark, one bright, and one with softer lights, and I've kind of pushed forward back my depth so I can, my eyes go straight to the forehead, and I'm knocking things back so I can get more contrast and depth, so I have more depth in there. So I'm working my tones. Before I was, even white, even black, but now I'm just trying to quickly separate those tones, either using masking or gradients to kind of separate that out. And here you can see my layers for different levels of depth. I'm trying to focus in, so it's that top area that I'm really focusing on now. Before it was all even, right? And I'm trying to separate those tones so it feels like it has more 3D effect, and I can draw your eye to, mostly his eyes, nose, and less detail as I go down, right? And eventually I merge it down. I'll use the mixer brush or the smudge brush, and I'll blend things together. And eventually I'm starting to smudge out my line work, so you don't even see my line work after a while, right? And again, I've just merged that layer, duplicate it, up the levels so that I can concentrate, knock out some of the details by taking out some of the black, so that you can see there's, instead of the wrinkles being too dark, I've taken out some of black so it's less contrast in that area, right? So I'm trying to control what areas I want, and then eventually I'll merge it down again and not just rely on my levels, but actually physically painting it to add more contrast to areas and tone it up and have the details, work on those details a bit more, right? Lasso tool is a great way, and a gradient tool is a great way of knocking things forward and backwards. Right? So it's kind of, it's kind of getting there, and it's about pushing that back part. Now I'm doing ambient light where I don't want to go fully to black. If I make it fully to jet black in the background, it will flatten the whole image. So I'm using a not quite black, but a little bit layer of black to give it some a little bit of light so it has more depth. If I did straight to black all the way to the edge, it would, basically disappear and that black area look flat. So I try to add a little bit, lighten it back up so there's a little bit more depth in there, and work on those details. And I just work backwards and forwards, and then painting in the details using either mixer brush, smudge tool to just smooth out my areas, right, and put in those details. Working on higher contrast areas, again, back and forth, and bringing things back up. I work from zooming in and zooming out. It's really important not to just look zoomed in all the time. Pull back, right? Again, I've lightened that nostril so that I allow areas that are dark, areas that are light to do the same things I would do for line work, right? If to get rid of a line, you're using a line to suggest different shapes, but if you take one area and make it darker and the other area lighter, it does the same thing that a line will do. Two different tones will create an edge instead of a line doing the same thing. Right? So sometimes you can see some relevance of where I've left line in and then decided to smudge it out or widen it and then dissipate that line. And work backwards but forwards, emphasizing certain details to bring it out so it has a little bit more depth. And again, I'm not afraid to flatten things out, paint on top, smudge things, duplicate it again, and even do gradients all over again. Right? So I'm just emphasizing I want those teeth to pop a little bit, so I'll put either from duplicating that layer, adjusting the levels, or adding a gradient and doing the same thing, or doing it in masking and replicating the same idea. I'm just adding touches here, touches there. But I try to keep, even though there's a lot of wrinkles here, I try to get an overall simple shapes. Like again, that 3D blocking, as I talked about in class, that will help the overall image and not get lost in the details. Right? I know there's a lot of wrinkles, but I still have an idea with, one, two, like this wrinkle, and that wrinkle, what they look like combined together. Right? I'll play adjustment with my levels again to just push the depth. I'm knocking the top of the forehead back a little bit, and so it can feel like it has a little bit of rounder image to the shape, and then working out those details to give a little bit of contrast in there. You don't want to. You have to be careful. You don't go overboard on too much contrast, or else it makes it too complicated. So that's why sometimes I'll use the gradient or masking to even things out and knock things back, and then paint out some of the small details so I don't go overboard on the contrast. So I'm zooming in, just working on the little, I guess I was thinking it's kind of like a bullet hole for his head. And there's a little bit of a trickery there, if you guys were paying attention. Now I'm doing blend modes for these colors, and I'm using, again, different colors, different things to bring out. I'm basically, in color, I'm using the forehead to focus in that area, so I'm using it strong green, slightly bluer and slightly bluer. I like to tint to different hues rather than using the same green. If you use the same green, lighter and darker, it ends up looking flat. If I use different colors and blend modes, it gives the image a little bit more rich in color. So again, I'm using a more yellowish green to bring out the details, and it knocks things out. And again, I'm not afraid to merge things, mix, like in this layer that I'm pointing out, in that layer, I'm shifting the tones, values, and contrast and saturation, and then duplicating it, and then merging it, and then I'll again lighten. And I'm doing a ambient light or backlighting on here, so I'm using some of it to knock down the depth because it's getting too dark. It's almost flattening out. But by lightening it and adding a little bit closer to the gray tone, it's making that side of the face fall back, which is really important. And I'm using more saturated purple to bring certain parts of the face so it pops out a little bit more. So even though it's still purple, I'm using saturation to pull things forward and to pull things back. Lighting to also do the same. So I'm concentrating on that. I could have left it alone, but I want to give it a little bit more depth there and knock things back and pull things forward. Right? So that back of his forehead falls back. Higher saturation and brighter light. I'm allowing that cheek and I guess that part of his jowls to pop out. And I'm doing the same thing, and even though I'm using the same color, it's the same principle: saturation, desaturating things to make things fall back. And notice in this area it's really dark, so it allows areas to pop out a little bit more, and less values here, so it falls back. If I get too crazy with the lights, I can use my levels, duplicate the layers, and then readjust. So again, I'm losing a little bit of information on the nose, so I'm kind of bringing that back with a harder, crisper line so I can get that edge. And by doing it with masking, it's kind of a fail-safe. I can test things out and see how it looks if I want to, right? And I can merge it down. I'm not afraid to merge things down after a while. If it looks good and I'm confident what I'm doing, I'll merge it down. It's not a big deal, right? And I'll refocus on those details once I'm on there. Now, see, look at those teeth. I could have used the brighter blue, but I went with a little bit of green and changed the saturation, changed the hue a little bit to bring it back up. Again, I want that nose and lips to pop out, so I'm using a different color or hue, a little bit more yellow to bring it out. And normal skin I would do red, but because it's zombie, green on red doesn't really work. It ends up being, like it kind of works, but it does weird things. So I'm just putting it really quickly, kind of test it out, see what it looks like. And I'll try to do with different overlays, merge things down. I don't want to get too monotone, so I try and mix colors wherever I can, so it gives it a little bit more depth and feels not as dead, right? If you use too many similar colors, I notice it makes your image look really dead. I'll mix colors, and I'll use that hue blend modes to help me mix colors, because I'm terrible at mixing colors, to be honest. But this gives me freedom to kind of try things out without any problems. I'm not afraid to do anything. And then once I'm done, merge them down. I'll use the mixer brush or the smudge tool to mix those colors, and then I'll eye drop it, and then paint in those details. So I'm not, you know, I'm using what's there, highlighting it, and I'm not, you know, accidentally picking colors I don't want. Right? So I'll use the blend modes to help me pick my colors. Then I drop those new mixed colors and then emphasize that a little bit better. So again, now it's just about tightening up on those details. Instead of it being really smudge, I'm adding a little bit more contrast, tightening up those lines or those areas to make it things to pop out a little bit more. Right? Again, a bit of that underside. Right? Most of my colors are real kind of close to what I'll have near the end, and I'll stay away from. Notice the picture. There's not a lot of pure whites. Right? There's a reason for that, because if you don't leave room for those pure whites, you can't. If you're always using white all the way through, there's very little contrast you can do. Right? Same with blacks. If you leave it, if you go all the way black too fast, it flattens the image. So I try to use it sparingly. So near the end, you know, I'm highlighting, you know, this backlighting right here on his nose. I'll eventually probably put a pure white in his eyeballs, right, just to make it have a little bit more glossier look to it. Right? And then I'm just tightening things up. I'm going back and forth. I know it looks like on the image I'm working all over the place, but I'm working on those details, popping it out. See, I've used a higher saturation or brighter orange to really bring that eye so it looks more dead. And then a pure higher saturation and a really pure hot white to make it look glossy looking. And then I'll knock things back. And I'm just basically merging. Notice on my layer stack, I do a lot of merging, right? It's just a fail-safe. I like to go back just in case I've screwed something back. I've got that one layer I could either mix the two that I've actually done, or I can go back. It's not as harmful. If my layers are getting ridiculous, which is starting to get to, sometimes if my file's starting to get too big, I will duplicate this entire file, merge everything down, and then I'll have less layers to work with, and I'll start all over again. I'll just add on from there on, right? Because sometimes if you get to a point where there's too many layers and it makes your computer insufferable and you can't even open it, it's not a bad idea to just duplicate it, merge it, and just work from there than to try to, you know, stick through it and keep working. Right? Because I like when I put down or I mix things, I want it to be react quickly rather than, you know, wait 2 minutes to find out what's happening after I put down that stroke. Right? I'll try to organize things as much as I can, but in groups I'll knock things back. Again, see how I've kind of taken that back part of the lip. I could have went black, but I want to have that nose to pop out, so I need to lighten that back area so that nose will pop out with a darker area. And I'm again playing around with my saturation, playing around with my tones, making things fall back a little bit. And gradients is a great way of doing it quickly, fast. I use gradients a lot because I could paint it by hand and work those tones slowly, but it's too much trouble. Sometimes I'll add I've added a noise layer just to kind of give it a little bit more texture, and I'll pull it out. And I'll use masking to mix in. I don't like to use that noise all the way throughout. I know on this on the video you can't really see the difference because it's a shitty resolution, but if it's, you know, if it's a higher quality, you'll probably be able to pick up that noise in the background. Right? I don't like to make things too slick or too smooth, else it feels a little bit funky. Again, just highlighting certain colors. I want the lips to kind of look a little bit more wet and shiny. And then I'll even, I think I've added a little bit of blur around the edges, mixed it, flattened it, so that the edges feel a little bit softer. And it allows for certain areas to be a little bit tighter and crisper in the details. Right? So then that softened out the edges. And that's pretty much how I work. Right? A lot of mixing, flattening. I'm a bit of a safety net. I don't like to paint all in one layer. Right? Eventually, I'll get rid of all this, but that's, I work my contrast backwards, forwards, colors, saturations, knock things backwards. That's pretty much it.